Time to blow your mind with historical homos.
Welcome to Historical Homos, the world's only no fucks given guide to queer history. For thousands of years, the powerful heterosexual elite has kept one filthy fact hidden from us all. History is gay as fuck. Every land and every era has had its queers, and every land and every era has dealt with them in their own queer ways. From Hadrian's Wall to Stonewall, the great queers of yesteryear count amongst themselves some of the greatest names in history. Plato, Michelangelo, Virginia Woolf, Marlene Dietrich, Mike Pence. Oops, that one shouldn't be in there. The point is, every gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, non-binary flavor you can imagine can be found somewhere in history. You just have to know where to look. Now, you could go read one of the hundreds of dry academic books written on the subject, or you could listen to us give you the X-rated, no fucks given, gossipy, sleazy, full frontal edition. If that's not your thing, be warned. And put your kids to bed, for Christ's sake, we're not running a daycare. But if you're wet, wild, and willing, come right on in, because the water is human temperature.
So let's go back in time and take another rewrite through our history. Celebrate ourselves tonight and cover all the things that's still a mystery. Cause if you think you know, you don't know. Around the world we go. Time to blow your mind with historical homos. Historical homos. Historical homos.
All right, everybody, and welcome to our very first episode of Historical Homos.
Woo!
I am Donal Brophy. I am a writer, producer, actor, general passionate history adventurer.
Intellectual even. And I am Bash, just Bash, like Cher. I am a sassy, slutty little historian, amateur historian, fine. I happen to have degrees from Columbia, Cambridge, not that anyone asked.
Fuck you.
I have a particular expertise and passion for the ancient Greeks, who we're going to be talking about today first. And yeah, I mean, fuck yeah, we're here. We did it. You know, we've been working on this for 2 years, trying to get this podcast off the ground. I can't believe it's finally happening.
Absolutely. We're so excited to be here with you guys today. And we thought, in honor of our very first episode, that we would start this crazy, wonderful journey off with an exploration of what else but toxic boyfriends in Greek mythology.
Of which there are many.
We've all had toxic boyfriends, and we all fucking love Greek mythology.
Oh my God. I was just thinking about toxic dick the other day. Like, I have...
Toxic dick?
Toxic dick.
Explain toxic dick to me.
It's like, you know those guys that are such dicks, and they do not deserve your attention whatsoever, but the dick is just so good, and you just can't stop.
Well, to quote Big Ange, good dick will imprison you.
It is so true. God bless Big Ange, wherever you are.
May she rest in peace.
For leaving us with those very sophisticated ideas to
when
contemplate.
the aliens come and they see the modern hieroglyphics that will be reality television in 2023, good dick will imprison you will be their one takeaway from the entire...
Yeah, the alien historians will write about how our lives all ended on Earth because of toxic dick.
They won't even know the Greeks existed, besides for the fact that your shirt will probably survive polyester, polyrayon material.
Okay, this shirt is expensive.
Oh, really?
So watch out. But it is shocking. Like, it never wrinkles. It's made from whatever Big Ange's tits were made from. And it will survive the ages.
Well, before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take ourselves back to ancient Greece and provide us a little context, Bash, will you, for the old Greek civilization.
So we're talking about like the 500s, 400s BC, 300s, maybe a little bit. It's all about Athens because that's usually what we have our evidence from mostly. But the ancient Greeks were famous for being so gay, primarily for these relationships between older men, and I use the term older loosely because it entails a huge range of ages, and teenage boys, right? So everybody sort of writes this off as like, oh, the Greeks were pedophiles and it's weird and we don't understand it. And that's why I wanted to go into this whole topic today, because I think there's actually some interesting stuff that it helps us all reflect on. About being, not to mention, get off to. Actually, one thing about my time at Cambridge as a classics scholar that I would like to bring up at this junction is I used to have this weird thing where anytime I was doing Greek work, I got so horny. Like there was something about reading Greek that just
the creature would stir.
Like the number of times I left the library to go jack off in my dorm room is crazy. When I was reading like Greek tragedy.
Aww.
So that's who I am, just for a little insight.
That's very sweet though.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
I'm
for
sure
saying that. No one has ever said that.
I'm sure we turned a black light on those dusty old wooden walls of Cambridge. There'd be a lot of those wood panels would be crawling away looking for a womb to fertilize somewhere along the way, but maybe from the 16th century. So at the time, Greece was more of a collection of city-states than it was an actual country, with Athens being the swaggery New York, Hollywood kind of like everyone wanted to emulate cool sibling of all these city-states. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah. Athens is like the head honcho, the HBIC. They've just won the war against the Persians, so they have a bunch of money. They have a navy. Sparta is famously their big competition, right? But Athens is the fun one. Athens is where everyone is being gay and going to the theater and doing all this stuff. All the Spartans do is like kill each other and teach women to read or something, So it's just, it's not very exciting over there.
But the Athens were not teaching the women to read.
The Athenians are such misogynists. They don't give a shit about women or teaching them to read or educating them or really fucking them, it seems. And what's interesting about the Greeks too is that they have these gay gods. Like not every culture has gay gods, The Romans didn't have any stories of their own. Obviously, they stole everything from the Greeks because they had no imaginations. But the Greeks have these myths that are sort of homegrown. So I think that's interesting too, because all this gay stuff was clearly baked deeply into their culture. So that said, we should probably, give a little trigger warning to be fair to everybody that we are going to be talking about some relationships between older adults and what today we would call underage teenagers. So be warned.
But all prepubescent in that sense. I mean,
post.
Excuse me. All post.
Such a subtle difference.
All post-pubescent. And, like they weren't going around having sex with babies, which is a common misconception, which is obviously very, very, very bad. But, in terms of the modern age of consent, obviously the Athenians didn't give a flying fuck about any of that. So, in terms of a trigger warning, we should say that, like, in terms of the modern sensibility, we are talking about teenage guys and older, which at the time the life expectancy wasn't so long. So older could mean in your 20s or 30s.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, I don't think we should try to understand Greek sexuality through a modern lens of anything, of age, of consent, of sex, of what they're like. It doesn't make sense, right? So let's approach it with that.
The only way we can try to understand it is if we have the ability to talk freely about it without any modern constraints.
Yeah.
Copy that.
God, thank you, Professor.
There we go.
And with that, we open the Book of Gay to read our first story in historical Homos history.
Right, Act 1, the myth of Zeus and Ganymede.
It begins many eons ago on the slopes of Troy, generations before Brad Pitt would storm the city and try to kill the fuck out of Eric Bana. Is that how you say his name? Bana. That's definitely not how you say it. Not how you say it. He's Australian. It's like Eric Bana or something.
You say tomato, I say tomato.
That movie was terrible. Do you remember that movie with Brad Pitt?
So bad.
And they looked hot, and that's pretty much what cinema is about. But back to the real Troy. It's a gorgeous afternoon. A young prince is meandering through the mountains, herding his sheep as all good Trojans are wont to do. He is the son of the king, and much more importantly, ball-droppingly beautiful. Golden hair, ravishing bod, suggestively perky bottom, kind of like a young me, really. His name is Ganymede, and his beauty hasn't escaped the notice of literally anyone around him, including the gods. Rumor has it, the goddess of the dawn, Eos, is planning to abduct him and whisk him off to live with and or inside her. The other gods have a problem with this, not least because the head honcho, king of the gods, divine Dom Daddy Zeus himself, who Donal is obviously impersonating today with that hair, has set his own lustful eyes on the twinktastic Ganymede. So it's no coincidence when, behind the idyllic scene I just sketched so vividly above, a storm begins to gather, rapidly gaining on the beautiful prince. Because lightning-dicked Zeus, god of thunder, is about to come on the scene in every sense of the word. Nice, yeah, we needed that. Zeus, of course, was famous for his wandering eye, much to the chagrin of his neglected and therefore psycho bitch wife, Hera. Usually he had the decency to mack on his babes down on Earth, carrying them off willingly or not, to bone and then birth him the next generation of demigods. But not this time. Zeus isn't about to let some slutty dawn goddess mop up his sloppy seconds. He wants the boy entirely to himself. Doesn't that just make your penis tingle? So Zeus turns up the heat on his hurricane, encircling People magazine's hottest Trojan of the year in a maelstrom of mist, thunder, and mask-for-mask lightning. Suddenly, the horny king of Olympus emerges as a giant eagle, obviously the hottest thing you could be, grasps the terrified boy in his talons and beats his wings up toward Mount Olympus. Then, boom, they land. Zeus is safely whisked off the most gorgeous boy in the world to his new home in literal heaven, and wastes no time in congratulating Ganymede on his recent elevation. Ganymede's father is back on Earth, and he's in absolute pieces at this point. His prized, beautiful son is nowhere to be found and presumed dead. Zeus, in a rare moment of giving a crap about someone else, takes pity on the king and lets him know his son is now immortal and living with the gods, which is obviously better than living with his pathetic biological family. He sweetens the deal by paying the king with a couple immortal horses and a magic grapevine, and sadly for Ganymede, that price is right. His father rapidly gets over the effective death of his child faster than Zeus can pop a boner. Back on Olympus, though, Hera, queen of the gods, will not stand for the affront to her honor. So instead, she takes out her rage on the Trojan people and becomes an enemy to them for all time, including to the king's grandson, Priam, who's the father of Paris, who's the scheming, womanizing bastard that eventually seduces Helen of Troy. So thanks to Zeus's homosexually wandering eye, we get the Trojan War, thousands of men dead, and enough drama to sustain the poets for 1,000 years. Now that is what I call Greek tragedy.
Couple of questions on that.
Yes, please, it's weird.
First of all, Hera. I mean, why would she be jealous of a mere mortal young man?
No, good question. I think she's just jealous of anyone who's taking Zeus's attention away from her, even though Zeus has proven time and time again that he does not want to hang out with his wife or in her bed.
A little bit of a misogynistic myth or a little insight into how they view women.
Yeah. Well, I think Hera was also annoying, though, so maybe that is why Zeus didn't want to fuck her. I don't know.
Sound like she was kind of a murderous fuckhead as well, right? Yeah. I mean, she did.
Oh, she was not to be trifled with. Absolutely.
Punished a whole civilization just because the kid was cute.
Right, yeah. I wish they would write that about me someday. Maybe they will. Maybe I'll bring down a country someday. The myth, I think, is basically trying to reflect this whole tradition of pederasty, right? Which is the fancy word for older men being in relationships with teenage boys or young men. So it's kind of a sensitive subject. Like, we basically just think it's pedophilia, like we said already. But in the ancient world, this was a completely natural and socially approved type of relationship. So, and Ganymede, the story of Ganymede, we've kind of forgotten about, but it was everywhere back in the ancient world. If you live in New York, you can go see at the Met like a giant mosaic of Ganymede being taken by the eagle. So that image was everywhere. And I guess the myth is sort of a way for the Greeks to be like, even Zeus is doing it, so must be fun, must be right, because they kind of reflected their own beliefs onto their divine models.
So, but it's not a metaphor for something? It's not like a lesson on life in some way?
I think some people think of it like that. Like some people talk about the myth as Ganymede is just the ideal of youthful beauty, and they're sort of elevating it to the heavens to live forever with the gods. So like beauty is kind of a divinity and all of that. But I don't know. I don't think that the Greeks thought on a daily basis in that kind of like super symbolic way. It's not like we think about, the story of Adam and Eve being very symbolic or something, if that's something that you believe.
Basically they're normalizing the fact that what is very prevalent in the society is older, more mature guys having affairs or taking the early manhood of other, up and comers and bringing them, like mentoring them into society. It's basically the archetype.
I thought you were going to go in a really different direction when you said taking their manhood.
No. I mean,
I was like, that sounds kind of hot.
Yeah, I'm sure that happened too.
No, but for me, it's definitely that. It's the Greeks reflecting something very natural in their society. And it was these relationships between older men and younger boys were erotic. They were sexual. They were not purely sexual. That wasn't the intent. But when Sophocles, a great tragedian of ancient Greece, writes about Ganymede, he says that Ganymede's thighs inflamed Zeus. And that's like a whole thing about the primary form of sex in these relationships is what is called intercrural sex, which I know sounds very hot.
Explain that.
Which is when the older guy is on top and just puts his dick in between the thighs. I'm trying to do a diagram of this and sort of jacks himself off that way.
Okay. Because they weren't really into foreplay at this time, right? Like blowjobs were considered.
Well, it's basically the thigh sex and kissing that you're supposed to do in these relationships. You're not blowjobs, anal, all of that is technically considered very gauche by the Greeks, whether you're doing it with a man or a woman. So it's not really something that was done at the time. Of course, everyone did it.
So you could technically say the Greeks weren't gay at all.
Yeah. Except for everything I'm about to tell you.
So were the myths, were they real to the Greeks? Do they think they actually happened?
Yeah, I thought in some. This is the really interesting thing too that makes it sort of different from the Bible stories or something well, I guess people think that those happen too.
Some people.
Yeah. But the Greeks thought that all of these people like Achilles, Hercules, all of them did exist at some point in the legendary past. So, and of course they thought the gods were real. So for them, it was no longer the case that gods regularly interacted with human beings, but they definitely thought that it used to happen no matter how far ago it was, And actually, importantly for the Greeks, they did believe that the gods could still appear to them, in Epiphany. So that's a big part of Greek religion is recreating the epiphanies of the gods in a temple or anything like that. So yeah, this is real to them on some level.
Act 2. The very, very gay Greeks.
So basically, the Greeks were so fucking gay, but why? What was it about? How did it all start? I mean, why were they so gay as opposed to a lot of the other ancient civilizations around at the time?
It starts with hating women. No, but that was obviously a big part of it. The women in ancient Athens, at least, were pretty much secluded. If women of a certain class, if you're a farmer, you go do whatever you want. But aristocratic women were kind of kept at home, very domesticated. They were not out and about in society. So men spent most of their time together, right? And I mean, you try not being gay if everyone at your local equinox is working out in the nude. They are
covered in olive oil.
Covered in olive oil, all lubed up. They are always naked, these Greeks. They work out naked, they compete in sports naked. They're just running around naked all the time. So of course they're gonna start shipping each other.
What if you had low-hanging balls and you were a Greek and you were trying to run a marathon? That would be uncomfortable.
We should get some Greeks on to discuss that.
There were no jockstraps at all?
No,
I know. Angie's tits material, that stuff.
And they seem to have done a lot of wrestling too, So they were really into squeezing the balls on the skin and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Doesn't sound pleasant. So, but this type of relationship that existed in pederasty was much more an institution. So it was more structured. It had a code of etiquette behind it. You couldn't just do anything, know?
Right.
And that's what's interesting about it is the older guy who's called the erastes in ancient Greek, which just means the lover, is supposed to sort of court the younger one. And the top, before the thigh top, is supposed to court him. And then the younger one, who's called the eromenos, which means beloved in ancient Greek, is not supposed to give in too soon. He's supposed to be a little coquettish and oh, you brought me presents, yay. Yeah. And so they bring him, you're supposed to bring him rabbits and fighting cocks and weapons and all of this stuff that I guess boys loved back then.
My mind just keeps on going to the women at home just being the fuck, who are you bringing that rabbit to? What happened to the rabbit? You brought it to that little slut bag down the gym. Yeah. I mean, not that much has changed, really.
You come home with rabbit fur on your...
I know, you were with the Romanos group.
It's like the equivalent of the lipstick on the collar.
Yeah. Pederasty.
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 There we go.
As opposed to pedophilia, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, like we said, these teenagers are post-pubescent. Like they're not, they're not young children. We talk about pedophilia as being anyone who's underage, I think, under the age of consent nowadays. That's kind of our definition. But the Greeks don't have any concept of consent, which is gross and problematic to us in so many ways for women or men. And of course, they are also marrying girls as soon as they have their, periods, if not younger. So
not a lot of free will, if you will. Not a lot of free will in terms, unless you're a rich, sort aristocratic or semi-aristocratic man, you're the only one that really gets to call the shots.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. I mean, I'm not sure about no free will. They did invent democracy, so they've got some chops.
Yeah.
But society back then was more structured in these ways. Like the life expectancy was maybe 30 years. So by the time you're 15, you're middle aged for most people. And for aristocrats, it's different. They have better lives. They live longer. As in every era of history. But it's just a slightly different, calculus that they're operating on. So that's all happening. The younger one, the Eromenos, is typically somewhere between 13 to 17. And then this older guy, the Erastes, is supposed to be anywhere from 25 and above, we think, roughly. Right? So then there's also that gray area in the 18 to 25 period where we know that there are relationships between people that age and younger and between that age and older. So it's not all cookie cutter,
So if you want to see this situation live in action, you just Google Coach Fucks Player into Pornhub, basically.
Absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
that's exactly what
those are all primary sources from ancient Greece.
Gotcha.
There is a lot of anxiety around the gymnasium as a pickup spot. So that Coach Fucks Player thing is something that plays into it because everybody is worried about all of these naked boys running around working out and older guys coming in and trying to hit on them.
Of course, and if you is it a status symbol if you get the hottest young guy?
Yes,
right.
Yeah, and that's totally what this is about. It's almost like a British boarding school, like a prefect system.
Yeah.
It's a way of selecting the boys who are not only the most beautiful but have the best character.
I'm very triggered by that because that reminds me of not being picked in PE in the football team. I would be the last one to be molested.
But that's because you were gay.
Well, sure, yeah. But I'd be left with the guy dragging his left leg behind him to mentor me.
Hey, I'd take it.
Yeah.
So and back to that point about Coach Fucks Player, it's supposed to be more than that. It's supposed to be a loving relationship. It's supposed to be a mentorship almost. So it's not just about the sex. And of course, that's where all of our pervy minds go immediately. We're like, how much were they fucking and in what holes? But it was actually much more about bringing these younger men up to be good citizens because, like we said, they lived in a democracy, right? So the men all had a very important civic, social role to play, very public roles. So there's all this anxiety in the Greek mind around how do we get good men to lead us,
And how was that not in the family structure, like the way we have in the modern sense, like your father being the one that would kind of, fuck you, just kidding.
Your father who would teach you about anal sex.
No, how is it not like your father or members of your family that would be the, your mentors or whatever? This seems like it was more of a communal experience.
Well, think about the luck of the draw that people get with their fathers. Not everyone gets a good father. And I think the point is that this is almost, it's like it takes a village, I don't think they're leaving everything to these parental figures. There's also a different relationship between parents and children in ancient Greece. It's not necessarily the same nuclear family idea that we have. Families are bigger, they have, cousins and stuff that you live near, and you're not educated by your parents. You're educated by, at least if you're of a certain social standing, you're educated by a tutor or, someone from outside the family. So I think this whole, on the one hand, there is this sexual side to pederasty where it obviously evolves because men are just horny for hot boys. But there's also this side where it's it plays a really important social role because they need good guys around. And it doesn't always work out. I mean, Socrates had a really hot beloved, hot Eromenos.
Of course he did.
And Socrates was famously hideous. But Alcibiades, his Eromenos, ends up being a traitor to all of Athens because he goes over to Persia and sells state secrets. So, it doesn't always work out.
Right. But it's nice work if you can get it, is what you're saying. I mean, it's not a bad system in theory.
Yeah, no,
It's
exactly.
a mentorship system. And it's amongst the aristocratic and middle class, if there was a middle class at the time, men. Basically, like moneyed men got to be mentored by other older gentlemen. And it was a communal experience in the city of Athens. So everyone brought everybody up. And it actually created a very strong, tight city-state of warriors.
Well, in theory.
In theory.
Yeah.
In theory. Unless Socrates' little fucking piece of ass went over to Persia.
But that makes me think of something, which is that it also increases ties between citizens, right? Because now you have non-marriage based ties between these different families. So if your lover is like some old powerful guy and you're an up and coming family, like that's really good for business, right? So that's also why probably parents approved of these relationships. Like these were totally socially approved relationships. It wasn't like there were a bunch of queers running around in Athens and they weren't, they were all in the closet.
So you come over to the gym and your mom's like,
What have you got for me?
Don't come home.
You get any rabbits today?
Can you put some more olive oil on your ass there?
No, exactly. And but something you said though, the icky sexual stuff, it's like we think it's icky, but it's like it wasn't icky.
No, it's not icky.
And we have to try to understand that these relationships were mentorships, but they were also sexual and erotic because the Greeks didn't distinguish between those things in the way that we do, For us, it's like, oh, well, you have a relationship with your teacher and your teacher is your teacher and your boyfriend is your boyfriend. And it's like, that stuff was more...
Really? Your teacher's not your boyfriend? We'll get back to that later.
For most of us. I didn't have a good career in high school. So there's all of that. It's all about turning aristocrats into good men. And when you read about it in, Plato and stuff like that, they really emphasize the love side of it. So, and that's always been something that really sticks out to me about this, is that it's about the love between men and the way that when men actually love each other, especially in a democratic society, then they become better men. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the Greek word for love is eros. And eros is not like I guess in English, love has lots of different connotations. It means, filial love, friend love, sexual love, romantic love. But for the Greeks, eros they have different words for those other things. Eros is very specifically passionate love. So they have this idea, or Plato has this idea, that eros drives men to fall in love with beautiful things, which are necessarily good, because beautiful things are always good to the Greeks. And then that makes you a better man. So and then the eromenos becomes a better teenager or man by virtue of being in this relationship with someone who is ennobled by the power of eros.
I wonder if we weren't so bogged down by thousands of years of Christianity and self-hating, like prudery and all the rest of it, if the situation would be that different today. I mean, there's definitely, obviously, like the Kinsey scale. There's people that are as gay as fuck, like yourself, and then there's people that are a little bit more kind of like, on the Kinsey scale or whatever like that, like a little bit bisexual, would never admit to themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's the other important thing here. It's not like these people saw themselves as gay, right? Like there's no concept of homosexual. There's no concept of heterosexual. In terms of behavior, the norm for men, at least, is bisexuality. It's probably more normal to a Greek mind to be into boys and women than it is to just be into boys or just be into girls.
By boys, we mean post-adolescent.
Yeah, these teenagers, youths.
Yeah. Young men.
Right. So it's a very, highfalutin concept when you get to Plato and all of that. And I think it shows that they were trying to explore it themselves, just like you're trying to relate it to our modern society. It's like, what do these relationships do for us? So it's not all about sex, but it's slightly about sex. It's not all about love either. It's about creating a better society overall.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And the other side of it is that, those were obviously that was one type of homosexuality that existed at the time, right? It's not like we have all sorts of evidence from graffiti and, paintings and all sorts of, like, people were fucking each other every which way, as they have since the beginning of time. right?
Well, I mean, that's just the dirty secret, really, isn't there? As much as we try to intellectualize things and talk about things till the cows come home, at the end of the day, while we're talking right now, people are fucking all sorts of fucking, you know what I mean?
In this very house.
At the end, at the end of the day, you know, it's just like human beings are human beings.
Yeah, but the reason I bring it up is because there were homosexual relationships that happened between adult men as well.
Oh, okay.
You know, and everything we're talking about only holds for Greek, like Athenian citizens, right? So people who are completely enfranchised in Athens as a democracy. If you were a slave, if you were enslaved, if you were a foreigner, if you were from any other city, then none of these rules necessarily apply to you, right?
Which is a massive swath of the population.
Right, huge.
We're probably
Much
just
bigger than
talking we're probably just talking about aristocratic men.
Right, which is a relatively small percentage. And the other interesting thing is that a lot of these relationships continue well into old age, right? So once once a youth graduates from that kind of 13 to 17 range and they become an adult, they still maintain these relationships with their older lovers. And maybe they're not sexual anymore, we don't really know, but they still maintain that mentorship side for sure. There's one who follows a tragic poet named Agathon, who was another beauty of the day, apparently, all the way up to the court of Alexander the Great in Macedon, or what would become the court of Alexander the Great.
Who was basically a product of this entire...
Who was a total bisexual himself.
Act 3. Who bloody cares? I don't.
Things haven't really changed that much since then. I mean, or do you think this is a holdover from this culture that gay men still kind of worship youth and fetishize older dominant men?
Yeah, no, I think the Greeks literally invented that. Like, I think that sort of like Daddy-Twink dichotomy that is still alive and well today. But I think it definitely still has an effect on, you know, the worship of youth in gay culture and the fetishization of these older men as, you know, more manly, more dominant, more whatever. Oh my God, actually, funny side note, somebody told me that the new word for a femme top is a blouse. Like someone who's
that makes sense.
Someone who's a top, but who's kind of like a femme twink is a blouse, which I think is so glorious.
Yeah.
So, and I think the other thing is that there is this double standard almost in society that still exists today, where younger men are expected to be sexual and sexually experienced, but then we also have to like protect them from doing that too soon. And then at the same time, they don't have a lot of positive mentors for what loving relationships are like, you know? At least for gay men especially. I don't think I had any examples in my young life of like loving gay men. Until like I saw Will and Grace, and even then Will doesn't fall in love with anyone until like the 8th season. I mean, it's fucking depressing.
Yeah, I was quite lucky, or you could consider unlucky, because I had a very call me by your name experience when I was like 14 living in Rome, and I had an affair with a teacher who was like 24, 25 at the time.
Oh.
Only like a 10-year difference, which is probably the exact like age of and demographic of what was going on.
That's
why this conversation was so interesting to me, because I was definitely considered like underage, but I was definitely obviously physically and, you know, intellectually kind of able,
ready to go.
Exactly. But I was very lucky because you know, the teacher was kind of a gentleman, and we didn't fetishize me as a child. We just struck up a relationship. It was kind of a very natural thing. I didn't even think twice about it at the time. But then, of course, like I think reality set in, and he did, and then the whole thing was over. I think one of the reasons why we have well-intentioned laws is that, you know, it's like emotionally. You know, people, 14, 15-year-olds, they don't know how to, they think that's their whole world. They're not thinking, oh, you know, like on to the next one. They're like, this is it. I want to spend the rest of my life, you know, they're emotionally unable before they haven't lived long enough.
No, and it's not to say, like, obviously there are a lot of older people who take advantage of younger people in that way, you know, like there are plenty of examples of that. But I don't think it's always like that, you know, and I think we get very sensitive about teenagers being being sexual beings. Like, whereas like when I was a teenager, I was begging for it from anywhere I could get it, like women and men, you know? And so like, I just think it's almost like the call me by your name of it. Like, we're happy to watch beautiful love stories where, you know, they pan away from the two lovers when they're about to make sex. You're welcome for that. And you're not supposed to see any of the sexy part. But then when Stephen Fry marries like a 21-year-old guy, everyone's like, oh my God, it's so disgusting.
And again, could we also just note that, okay, this is all going on in Greek society, this mentorship and sexual mentorship, I suppose you could even say. But let's face it, girls of the same age it was still going on between older guys and younger women as well.
Yeah. And that's a huge point to me, because people in plenty of modern scholars are like, no. The Greeks were gay in a completely different way. They're not like us. We can't look at Greek homosexuality and relate it to modern homosexuality. And I'm like, well, you don't say that about them marrying the 12-year-old girl. You know,
Right.
they look back and they're like, yeah, that was weird. But they're not like, oh, they're so fundamentally different from us. Like, no, they're still heterosexual like you're heterosexual.
Yeah.
They're just doing it in a different way.
Or kings of Europe, you know, like in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, marrying like 12-year-olds, you know,
Yeah, it's fucked
princesses
up.
and
It's
stuff.
fucked up. It's fucked up to us, but it's like, that doesn't mean that they are different from us. So I think that we can trace a line back to these Greek.
I guess what's interesting about the Greeks is that it was okay, it was normalized to do it with guys too, which is what makes them interesting.
Yes.
And there's also this whole thing where, you know, this tradition of Greek love between men becomes, in the 19th century, something that the Victorians talk a lot about. So Oscar Wilde at his trial has this famous speech where he talks about the love that dare not speak its name, right? And he's talking about Greek love. He's trying to defend his affair with this younger man and say, it's like the Greeks did it. I'm not doing sex. It's just like, you know, all platonic.
Not a great defense. And
No, and it did
at
not
the
work.
Old Bailey.
They were like, you're
Great
gay.
writer, terrible defense attorney for himself.
No, yeah, he was one of those people, you know, those people who are like, I'll be my own attorney. It's like always a bad idea.
Yeah.
He went to jail and it did not end well. But yeah, there was this sort of false distinction between Greek love, which is platonic love, and then homosexual love, which people were starting to talk about in a sort of clinical, psychological way. And so the pedophilia side starts to become associated with homosexuality, which is really damaging to gay men over the 20th century.
Yeah.
Because like that's a whole thing where it's sort of assumed that homosexuals are naturally pedophiles in some way. And I think it's all about criminalizing homosexuality in the public imagination like that. The big thing for me is that these relationships were a way of celebrating love between men. Like, that's what I always go back to. Even if there was an age difference or whatever, like, in theory, this was supposed to be about making people be better people. And I think that's actually something we could learn from, you know, looking back at that, not in terms of like recreating the relationships, but in terms of thinking about like, what is the purpose of, you know, love? It's not just like it's not a narcissistic tendency to like have someone look after you and all of that. It's like, it's actually about making us all better people. So I'm going to leave it with that grandiose insight. You didn't even ask me if I had been in a Call Me By Your Name relationship.
Have you been in a Call Me By
No,
Your
and I
Name?
really wish I had.
Well, they don't like the gay ones. Well, even though I am as gay as a goose, but they don't.
Yeah, what?
But it is interesting that you weren't. I mean, considering that you're such a,
So hot.
you were asking for it too much, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
wanted it too much.
Yeah, they thought you were carrying a wire. They thought you were asking for it so much. They were like, "She's wired. That one. Stay away." Let's take it back for a second. Have you ever had an older boyfriend, partner?
I definitely think the older guys are more interesting. It's exactly for this reason, actually, is that they have like something to teach you, you know, like something that you can learn from. So I have had older boyfriends, but I was famously not 15 when I had them.
Yeah.
This Zeus and Ganymede story also becomes very influential in European history. So it's not just the Greek, you know, pederasty of it all. The image of these gods being gay with one another becomes really big in like European art and stuff like that. Christopher Marlowe, who we're going to talk about in another episode, has a play where he has Ganymede on Zeus's thigh, you know, so like this story kind of gets forgotten because Greek mythology is bowdlerized and straight-washed, and they take all the gay stuff out of it. But it's always been there.
Yeah.
So even though it's toxic and leads to tragic endings.
So at the end of the day, really, what I'm taking from this and what I feel like I'm learning from this is that this was actually kind of like quite a nuanced but very evolved, beautiful social structure that existed in the city-state of Athens that kept the city tight, kept these men. I mean, the Greeks very famously would encourage their soldiers to be boyfriends because it meant that they fought harder for each other in wars. I mean, why have we lost that? Why don't we?
Yeah, there was the sacred.
That makes the most sense to me. Like
there was the sacred band of Thebes, where it was a group of 300 boyfriends, right? Because they thought that if you fought side by side with your boyfriend, you would never be a coward, which is kind of brilliant. Like,
absolutely. God, if I was like someone was coming from my husband, I'd like literally, you know what I mean? It's
yeah. Or if someone that you really want to fuck and you're like, shit, I better not look like a little bitch.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, so that worked. That definitely worked. Yeah. They were actually the most formidable fighting force in Greece at the time.
Maybe the Pentagon is listening. Maybe they'll put some of their loaded budget into gay boyfriends.
I think you're right. I think we have something to learn, especially as a democracy where people fucking hate each other's guts, that there is something about these ties between people that can exist that have nothing to do with, marriage or any of the sort of social structure of
and it's interesting to me because
heterosexual social structure.
When I had my experience in Rome when I was 14 with this teacher, I was actually so the European Union have this system where in order to encourage cultural diversity and understanding, they have each public school will be partnered with another public schools in another country in the European Union, and you will go when you're like 14, 15 and spend 3 months as a student exchange.
Making out with a teacher.
Making out with teachers.
Right.
Getting sodomized in the garden of the Borghese. We'll cut that.
Oh, wait. One thing that I always think about that we have to talk, maybe we have to do an episode on this, but like, I always wonder how people had sex in ancient Greece, like butt sex, like safely.
How they douche?
Yeah,
that's really what you're talking about.
How do you prepare?
Well, apparently they had lamb stomachs sewed together, and they'd filled them with well water, and I'm totally making this up.
I thought that was so real.
Well, I'm such.
You're like
that's where my acting comes in.
You're like douching, and you're like, it better not look like little lamb guts anymore.
I'm sure they just weren't afraid of a little poo.
Yeah, and we'll leave you with that. Don't be afraid of a little ancient Greek poo.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of a little pubic hair either, you motherfuckers. Okay, we're not. You know what I mean?
You have a personal axe to grind here.
I don't know why everyone has to be bald and douched all the time, but it's the natural.
Just cut your fucking pubes, Donal.
All right. And that is a wrap on our very first episode of Historical Homos. We are so honored and excited that you showed up for us today, because this has been such an amazing process for us to get to a point where we're bringing this to you. So we hope you tune in to our next episode. I'm Donal Brophy.
And I'm Bash. Please follow us at historical.homos on Instagram. Go on our website, follow us there, email, sign up, whatever. Subscribe to this, like this, send it to every human person that you know, and we will send you a complimentary lamb intestine for all of your douching needs.